Welcome to HOA Rejected. The HOA wanted control, not safety. Take a breath and settle in, because this one gets wild fast. My name does not matter, but my job does. I am a commercial photographer in Madison, Wisconsin, and I always have a camera and extra batteries on me. I moved to Sequoia Terrace Landing Association 3 years ago because the mortgage was reasonable and the neighborhood looked quiet. The HOA name sounded upscale, but the reality was a bunch of neighbors who treated the mailbox cluster like an unofficial courtroom. Every dispute, every complaint, every rumor got hashed out in the parking lot while people checked their mail. I thought I could ignore it. I was wrong. The trouble started the day I decided to replace my fence. The old one was rotting, leaning, and honestly ugly. I pulled permits, hired a licensed contractor, and paid for a professional survey to make sure I was on my own property line. I thought I had covered every base. I was trying to refinance my house, and any lien threat could wreck the deal. I needed this project done clean, fast, and by the book. That is when Angela Perez found me. She is the Neighborhood Watch Liaison, which is a made-up title the HOA gave her so she could treat residents like suspects. Middle-aged white woman, gray shoulder-length wavy hair, always wearing a red cardigan and a black visor like she is about to referee a tennis match. She carries a bright phone case in her hand like a badge and waves it around when she talks. The laminated quiet hours notice she posts to threaten contractor work with no readable text has become her signature move. She tapes them to doors, mailboxes, fences, cars. I have seen 3 on my block alone. Angela runs a community safety committee like a private police force with no authority, and she controls the design compliance hotline the HOA pretends is for resident feedback. Really, it is just her writing herself violations and rubber stamping them with the board president's name. The first morning, I was standing in my yard with the surveyor and the contractor. We had driven the stakes, stretched the string line, and were double-checking the measurements. The contractor, a guy named Mike, was experienced and calm. He had done 100 fences in Madison. He told me the line was perfect, 6 inches inside my property, and the old fence had been encroaching slightly into the neighbor's yard for years. We were fixing it. Angela appeared at the edge of my driveway before we even touched a shovel. She marched up with her phone in one hand and a clipboard in the other, no greeting, no smile. She said, "You cannot do this without HOA approval." I turned and kept my voice level. I said, "I pulled city permits. I hired a licensed contractor. I am on my property line." She said, "The HOA has design standards. You need board approval for any exterior modification. You are in violation." I said, "I submitted my application 6 weeks ago. I got no response." She said, "That is because it was denied." I said, "I never received a denial letter." She said, "That is not my problem. If you start work without approval, I will fine you $500 per day." Mike stepped forward and said, "Ma'am, we have permits. The city approved this project." Angela did not even look at him. She said, "The city does not override HOA covenants. You can put your tools back in the truck, or I will call a tow company." I felt my chest tighten. I needed this fence done before the refinance appraiser showed up in 2 weeks. I said, "Angela, I followed every rule. I submitted the application. I included drawings, paint samples, and the survey. If the board denied it, they have to send me written notice. That is in the bylaws." She smiled, and it was not friendly. She said, "If you make me repeat myself, it gets more expensive." I kept my hands open and my voice calm, because the real move was still ahead. She handed me the clipboard. On it was a violation notice with my address, the date, and a fine schedule. The notice said I had started construction without approval, and that materials were being stored illegally on common property. Neither of those things was true. The materials were in my driveway. I had not started digging yet. I took a photo of the notice with my camera. Angela saw me do it and said, "That does not help you. I can put you on the agenda and keep you there." She turned and walked back to her own house, phone already at her ear. Mike looked at me and said, "Man, what do you want to do?" I said, "Keep setting up. I am not stopping." He said, "If she calls a tow truck, my insurance does not cover that." I said, she is bluffing. She does not have the authority to tow a contractor off private property. He nodded, but I could see he was not sure. He started unloading fence panels anyway. 20 minutes later, I was inside grabbing water when I heard Mike shout. I ran out and saw Angela standing next to our string line with one hand on the line itself. She yanked it hard, and the line snapped off one of the stakes. The stake tilted. The line went slack. Mike said, "Ma'am, do not touch our equipment." Angela said, "This string is not on your property. It is on the easement. That makes it dumping. I am documenting this for the board." She took photos with her phone, making a big show of circling the stakes and zooming in on the sagging line. I walked up and said, "Angela, the string marks the property line. The survey company placed it. You just tampered with it." She said, "I did not touch anything." "You are lying." I pointed to my doorbell camera, mounted on the corner of the garage. I said, "That camera has been recording since you walked up." Her face went blank for half a second, then she recovered and said, "Then it will show I was inspecting the easement. I have every right to be here." She turned and walked away before I could respond. Mike said, "I am going to reset the line, but if she does that again, I am packing up." I said, "Do not pack up. I am handling this." I went inside and pulled the doorbell footage. It showed Angela walking up, looking around, grabbing the string line with both hands, and yanking it hard. It showed her face clearly. It showed the timestamp. It showed everything. I saved the file to 3 places and texted a copy to my neighbor, a guy named Eric, who is a renter advocate and knows how to file complaints. Eric texted back immediately, "That is vandalism. You need to file a police report." I said, "Not yet. I need to use this at the right time." Eric said, "Fine, but I am your witness if you need one." The next day, the HOA tried to tag my supplies as dumping and demanded I remove them immediately. I got an email from the board president, a guy named Gerald, who I had never met in person. The email said my fence materials were in violation of the common area use policy, and I had 24 hours to remove them or face additional fines. The email did not specify which common area. My driveway is not a common area. I replied to Gerald's email with a photo of my driveway and a copy of the city permit. I said, "These materials are on my private property. Please clarify which HOA rule I am violating." He did not respond. That afternoon, Angela showed up again. This time she had a man with her. Someone I did not recognize. He was wearing a polo shirt with a property management company logo on it with no readable text. He introduced himself as the regional rep for the management company that handles Sequoia Terrace Landing Association. His name was Todd. Todd said, "We received a complaint about unpermitted construction. I need to see your HOA approval letter." I said, "I submitted an application 6 weeks ago. I never received a response." Todd said, "Then you need to stop work until the board reviews your application." I said, "The board already reviewed it. Angela told me it was denied, but I never got written notice." Todd said, "If you did not get written notice, then the application is still pending. Either way, you cannot proceed." I said, "I have city permits. The work is legal." Todd said, "City permits do not override HOA covenants. You signed those covenants when you bought the house." Angela stepped forward and said, "Todd, the application was denied. I sent the denial letter myself." I said, "I never received it." She said, "I sent it to the address on file." I said, "That is this address. I check my mail every day." She said, "Then maybe you missed it. That is not my problem. If you make me repeat myself, it gets more expensive." Todd looked uncomfortable. He said, "Look, I am just here to enforce the rules. If there is a dispute about the denial letter, you can bring it up at the next board meeting. Until then, you need to stop work." I said, "The next meeting is in 3 weeks. My refinance appraiser is coming in 2 weeks. I cannot wait." Todd said, "That is not my concern. If you continue work, the HOA can file a lien on your property." I felt the trap closing. I said, "Fine, I will stop work. but I want written confirmation that my application is still pending and that I will get a hearing at the next meeting. Todd said, I will pass that along to the board. He left. Angela stayed for another minute, smiling. She said, you should have asked for approval before you hired anyone. Now you are stuck. I did not respond. I just watched her walk away. Mike came out and said, what do you want me to do? I said, stop for now. I need to figure this out. He said, I can come back when you are clear with the HOA, but I have other jobs lined up. I cannot hold your spot forever. I said, I understand. I will call you. That night, I sat down and went through every document I had, the HOA covenants, the application I submitted, the emails, the doorbell footage. I called Eric and told him what happened. Eric said, they are running a scam. Angela is using the compliance hotline to create violations, and the management company is backing her up because they get paid per violation processed. You need to go over Todd's head. I said, how? He said, file a complaint with the management company's regional supervisor. Todd is just a local rep. The supervisor has to answer to the homeowners and the board. If you can prove Angela is fabricating violations, the supervisor will shut it down to avoid liability. I said, what about the lien threat? Eric said, they cannot file a lien without a hearing. If they try, you can sue them. But that takes time and money. Your best move is to stop them before it gets that far. I spent the next 2 days gathering evidence. I pulled every email I had sent to the HOA. I downloaded the doorbell footage and backed it up. I got written statements from Mike and from 2 other neighbors who had seen Angela harassing contractors in the past. I found out she had done this before. Another homeowner had tried to install a deck 2 years ago, and Angela had shut it down with fake violations. That homeowner eventually gave up and moved. I also found out Angela was running her community safety committee with no official board approval. She had appointed herself, printed her own business cards, and started issuing warnings like she was law enforcement. The board had never voted on it. Gerald, the board president, had just let it happen because he did not want to deal with her. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA drama. I filed a formal complaint with the management company's regional supervisor, a woman named Diane. I attached everything: the application I submitted, the emails, the doorbell footage of Angela tampering with the string line, the statements from neighbors. I also attached a copy of the HOA bylaws, showing that Angela had no authority to issue violations on her own. Diane responded within 24 hours. She said she was opening an investigation, and that Todd would be placed on leave pending the outcome. She said I could proceed with my fence project as long as I had city permits, which I did. She said the board would review my application at the next meeting, but that I did not need to wait for approval to start work, because the application had never been formally denied in writing. I forwarded Diane's email to Mike and told him to come back. He said, "Are you sure? If the HOA pushes back, I do not want to get stuck in the middle." I said, "They are not going to push back. The management company cleared it." He said, "All right. I will be there tomorrow morning." The next morning, Mike showed up with his crew. We reset the string line, double-checked the stakes, and started digging post holes. Everything was going smoothly for about an hour. Then Angela showed up. She walked up to Mike and said, "You need to stop. This project is not approved." Mike said, "Ma'am, the management company cleared it. We have written authorization." She said, "I do not care what the management company said. The board did not approve this. If you do not stop, I will have your truck towed." Mike looked at me. I pulled out my phone and showed Angela the email from Diane. I said, "The regional supervisor said we can proceed. If you have a problem, take it up with her." Angela read the email, and her face turned red. She said, "Diane does not have the authority to override the board. I am calling the police." I said, "Go ahead. I have permits. I have authorization. I have everything documented." She pulled out her phone and dialed. A minute later, she was talking to someone, claiming I was trespassing on HOA property and refusing to leave. She gave the address and hung up. Mike said, "Man, do you want me to keep working or wait for the cops?" I said, "Keep working. The cops are going to side with us." 20 minutes later, a Madison police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers got out. One of them, a young guy with a calm demeanor, walked over and asked what was going on. Angela jumped in before I could speak. She said, "This man is violating HOA rules. He is building a fence without approval. He is trespassing on common property. I need you to make him stop." The officer looked at me and said, "Is this your house?" I said, "Yes. I own this property. I have city permits, and the management company authorized the project." The officer said, "Can I see the permits?" I handed him the city permits and the email from Diane. He read both, then looked at Angela and said, "Ma'am, he has permits. This is his property. He is allowed to build a fence." Angela said, "The HOA has covenants. He has to follow them." The officer said, "HOA covenants are a civil matter. We do not enforce those. If you have a dispute, you need to handle it through the HOA or take it to court. But he is not trespassing, and he is not breaking any laws." Angela said, "So you are just going to let him do whatever he wants?" The officer said, "Ma'am, I am going to let him build a fence on his own property with a valid permit. If you keep calling us for civil disputes, you could be cited for misuse of emergency services." Angela's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The officer walked back to his cruiser, spoke to his partner, and they both drove away. Mike grinned and said, "All right, let us finish this thing." We worked the rest of the day without interruption. By the time the sun went down, we had 10 post holes dug and 4 posts set in concrete. The fence was finally happening. That night, I got an email from Gerald, the board president. It said, "The board has reviewed your application and approved your fence project retroactively. Please disregard any previous communications from HOA representatives regarding this matter. We apologize for the confusion." I read it twice. It was the first time Gerald had acknowledged anything. I forwarded the email to Eric. Eric texted back, "They are covering. Angela screwed up and now they are pretending it never happened. Do not let this go. You need to push for accountability." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "File a formal complaint at the next board meeting. Make them explain why Angela had the authority to issue violations, why you never got a denial letter, and why Todd tried to shut down your legal project. If you do not push, they will just let Angela keep doing this to other people." I spent the next week finishing the fence. Mike and his crew worked fast. We had the posts set, the rails installed, and the panels up in 5 days. The fence looked great. It was 6 feet tall, solid cedar, stained a clean natural brown. The survey line was perfect. The city inspector came out, checked everything, and signed off on the permit. But I was not done. I wanted Angela held accountable. 2 weeks later, I showed up at the monthly HOA board meeting. The meetings are held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the mailbox cluster. About 15 homeowners were there, most of them older folks who came every month to complain about landscaping or parking. Gerald, the board president, sat at a folding table in the front with 2 other board members. Angela was sitting in the front row, arms crossed, looking smug. Gerald opened the meeting with the usual announcements, then said, "We will now open the floor for homeowner comments. Please keep your remarks brief." I stood up and said, "I want to file a formal complaint against Angela Perez for harassment, vandalism, and abuse of authority." The room went silent. Angela turned and stared at me. Gerald said, "That is a serious accusation. Do you have evidence?" I said yes. I have video footage of Angela tampering with my contractor's equipment. I have emails showing she issued violations without board approval. I have statements from neighbors confirming she has done this before. And I have documentation proving that the management company rep who backed her up was enabling this pattern of abuse. Angela stood up and said, "That is a lie. I was doing my job. He started construction without approval." I pulled out my phone and played the doorbell footage on the projector screen at the front of the room. Everyone watched Angela walk up to the string line, look around, and yank it hard. The timestamp was clear. A few people gasped. One woman in the back said, Oh my God. Angela said, "That does not prove anything. I was inspecting the easement." I said, "The string line was on my property. The surveyor placed it. You had no right to touch it." Gerald looked uncomfortable. He said, "Angela, did you issue a violation notice to this homeowner?" Angela said yes. He was building without approval. Gerald said, "Did the board vote to deny his application?" Angela hesitated, then said no, but it was obviously non-compliant. Gerald said, "If the board did not vote to deny it, then you had no authority to issue a violation." Angela said, "I am the neighborhood watch liaison. I have the authority to enforce compliance." Gerald said, "That title does not give you enforcement authority. The board has to vote on violations." Angela said, "Then maybe the board should start paying attention to what is happening in this neighborhood." Eric, who was sitting a few rows behind me, stood up and said, "I have a question for the board. Did you authorize Angela to run a community safety committee?" Gerald said, "Not formally, no." Eric said, "Then she has been operating without authority for at least 2 years. She has been issuing warnings, threatening homeowners, and harassing contractors. That is a liability issue for the association." One of the other board members, a woman named Carol, said, "We should table this discussion until we can review the bylaws." I said no. I want this addressed tonight. Angela has been abusing her position, and the management company rep, Todd, enabled it. I filed a complaint with the regional supervisor, and she confirmed that Angela had no authority to shut down my project. Todd is already on leave. Now I want to know what the board is going to do about Angela. Gerald said, "We will review your complaint and respond in writing within 30 days. I said that is not good enough. I want a vote tonight to remove Angela from any HOA role. Angela stood up and shouted, "You cannot do that. I have been protecting this neighborhood for years. You people do not appreciate what I do." Someone in the back said, "We appreciate not being harassed." Another person said, "I had the same problem with her last year. She threatened to fine me for parking my own car in my own driveway." The room erupted. People started talking over each other, sharing their own stories about Angela. One guy said she had called the cops on his lawn care company for noise violations during legal working hours. Another woman said Angela had tried to ban her from using the community pool because her guest pass was printed on the wrong color paper. Gerald banged his hand on the table and said, "Everyone, please calm down. We will address this at the next meeting." I said no. I want a motion on the record tonight. Eric stood up and said, "I move that the board immediately suspend Angela Perez from any HOA role pending a full investigation into her conduct." Someone in the back said, "I second that." Gerald looked panicked. He said, "We cannot vote on that tonight. It is not on the agenda." Eric said, "According to the bylaws, any homeowner can make a motion during the comment period, and the board has to vote on it if it is seconded." Carol, the other board member, leaned over and whispered to Gerald. He nodded, then said, "Fine. All in favor of suspending Angela Perez from any HOA role pending an investigation, say aye." Carol and the third board member both said aye. Gerald hesitated, then said aye. The motion passed. Angela stood up, grabbed her phone and her clipboard, and said, "This is not over. I can put you on the agenda and keep you there." Eric said, "You just got suspended. You do not have an agenda anymore." Angela stormed toward the door. As she reached it, someone in the back said, "Wait, before you go, do you want to make a motion for the record?" The room burst into laughter. Angela slammed the door behind her. After the meeting, Eric and I stood outside the clubhouse. He said, "That was wild. You actually got her suspended." I said it is not enough. I want her removed permanently, and I want the board to explain how this went on for so long. Eric said, "You are going to get that. Diane is running a full audit. Once that comes out, the board is going to have to act." He was right. 3 weeks later, Diane released her audit report to every homeowner in the association. The report detailed Angela's pattern of issuing fake violations, threatening contractors, and harassing homeowners. It also showed that Todd, the local management company rep, had processed dozens of Angela's violations without verifying them, which violated company policy. Todd was fired. The management company disciplined the rep who enabled it, and Angela's conduct was referred to the board for permanent removal. But the real kicker came from the evidence I had gathered. The doorbell footage and the neighbor statements proved that Angela's timeline was false. She had claimed I started construction before submitting an application. The timestamps showed I had submitted the application 6 weeks before the first post hole was dug. She had claimed she sent a denial letter. The postal records showed no certified mail to my address during that time. She had claimed I was dumping materials on common property. The photos I took showed everything in my driveway. Her entire case fell apart. At the next board meeting, the board voted to permanently remove Angela from any HOA role and to ban her from attending future meetings unless she had a legitimate agenda item. Gerald also resigned as board president, citing personal reasons, but everyone knew it was because he had let Angela run wild for too long. The city sent a formal warning to the HOA to stop interfering with permitted work, and the board publicly reversed Karen policy to avoid municipal trouble. They also revised the covenants to clarify that neighborhood watch liaisons have no enforcement authority, and that all violations must be approved by a majority board vote before being issued. As for me, I got my fence finished on time. The appraiser came out, loved the work, and my refinance went through without a hitch. I also got a formal apology letter from the HOA board and a refund for the violation fines Angela had tried to impose, plus reimbursement for my legal consultation fees and the cost of the extra survey I had to order when she tampered with the string line. Eric became the new board president. He ran unopposed and won by a landslide. His first act was to create a formal complaint process for homeowners who felt harassed by board members or HOA reps. His second act was to fire the management company and hire a new one with better oversight. Angela moved out of the neighborhood 6 months later. I heard she tried to join the HOA board in her new community, but they turned her down after someone Googled her name and found the audit report. Turns out, a management audit that exposed the pattern is hard to live down. I still live in Sequoia Terrace Landing Association. The mailbox cluster is still the unofficial courtroom, but now the arguments are about landscaping and parking, not fake violations and harassment. I kept the laminated quiet hours notice Angela taped to my garage door. I framed it and hung it in my office as a reminder that sometimes the craziest people are the ones who think they are protecting you. And every time I look at my fence, I think about the string line she yanked. That one moment, caught on camera, became evidence number 1. It brought down her little empire, got the management company cleaned up, and made sure the next person who wanted to build a fence in this neighborhood would not have to fight the same fight. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.